The small village of Valebrook had been a haven for survivors amidst the chaos of the undead apocalypse. Nestled deep in the forest, it was one of the last remaining pockets of humanity, but every day brought new challenges. The undead, relentless and unyielding, were constantly closing in, driven by their primal instincts and hunger for living flesh. As dawn broke over the village, its inhabitants gathered in the town square, a meeting spot they had long since fortified. The sun barely pierced through the dense trees surrounding the village, casting long shadows that only seemed to amplify the dread in the air. Among them stood Adam, the village's unofficial leader. His face was lined with exhaustion, but his eyes still held a spark of determination. Adam had once been an architect, now reduced to the role of protector. He glanced over the makeshift barricades they had set up to protect the perimeter of their village. The wooden walls were sturdy, but the constant pressure from the horde was beginning to take its toll. The undead had grown more organized, more aggressive with every passing day. What had once been a series of random, aimless attacks had evolved into calculated, coordinated onslaughts. They seemed to be learning, adapting. It was as though the virus that created them had given them an instinct for warfare. Adam turned to his trusted group, Mira, a former nurse who had become the village's healer, and Luke, a mechanic who had worked tirelessly to fortify their defenses. They were joined by a handful of fighters, each one skilled in survival, but none of them had ever faced a threat this dire. The weight of their task was clear in their faces, but they knew they had no choice. Valebrook was their last chance. "Today's the day," Adam said, his voice steady despite the rising tension. "If we don't push them back, if we don't take the fight to them, we're finished." Mira looked at him, her eyes filled with concern. "How?" "We've fought off dozens of waves, and each time, they come back stronger. We can barely hold the gates." Adam nodded solemnly. "I know, but there's something we need to do. I think I've figured out how they're coordinating. There's a pattern. We need to strike at the heart of it." Luke, who had been silently observing the horizon, spoke up. "You're talking about their leader, aren't you? The one who's been guiding them?" Adam didn't answer right away. There was no solid proof, just a feeling, an unsettling instinct he couldn't shake. They had seen a few of the undead act differently, smarter, faster, more tactical. It had started with smaller skirmishes but escalated as the weeks went by. Adam believed that somewhere, deep in the heart of the undead horde, there was a leader. If they could find it, destroy it, the rest of the horde might fall apart. Mira shook her head, her voice filled with doubt. "And if you're wrong? If you're wrong and we're chasing ghosts? What do we do then?" "We fight," Adam replied firmly. "We fight until there's nothing left. But this is our best shot." The group fell silent, the weight of Adam's words hanging heavily in the air. They had come to the hard realization that survival in this new world was a gamble. Every decision could be their last. Yet, something in Adam's conviction sparked a glimmer of hope in them. This was their village, their home, and they couldn't let it fall without a fight. Adam gathered his group, giving them a final look of encouragement before they set out. The undead were closing in, but there was still time to strike. They would raid the outskirts, create diversions, and gather any intelligence they could find. In a world of endless night, every sliver of light was a beacon of hope. As they moved towards the edge of the village, the sound of distant groans and dragging footsteps echoed through the trees. The undead were out there, waiting. And the battle to save Valebrook was about to begin. The village was their last hope, but the cost of defending it was going to be higher than any of them had imagined. The morning fog still clung to the ground as Adam and his small group set off from the safety of Valebrook's barricades. Each step they took into the forest felt heavier than the last, as if the very earth beneath them was pulling them toward an uncertain fate. The villagers had always kept a watchful eye on the surrounding woods, but now, they were stepping into the heart of enemy territory. The air was thick with the scent of decay and the distant groans of the undead, echoing like a haunting melody that sent chills down their spines. Adam led the way, his mind racing with calculations. If there was one thing he had learned in the past year, it was that the undead weren't just mindless creatures. They had a purpose, a strategy, even if it was hard to see. He had noticed the change in their behavior, the way they moved in groups, the way they circled around certain areas. His gut told him that something was guiding them, something other than the virus itself. Mira, who walked just behind him, adjusted the straps of her medical kit and scanned the woods with a wary eye. She had treated enough wounded to know the horrors that lay ahead, but there was an unease in her chest that no amount of experience could shake. "You really think this leader exists?" she asked quietly, her voice barely rising above a whisper. Adam glanced back at her, his expression grim. "I don't know, but if they're organizing, then someone's in charge. We need to find out who, and we need to stop them before it's too late." Luke, carrying a modified crossbow, nodded in agreement. "If we can't break their chain of command, we'll never win. But if we can, we might just have a shot." The group pressed on, the forest growing thicker as they ventured deeper. The sounds of the undead became more distinct now, an eerie chorus of growls, footfalls, and rattling chains that echoed through the trees. Adam raised his hand to signal the others to stop. Ahead, a small clearing appeared, and from the shadows, the silhouette of a figure emerged. It was a lone undead, but this one moved differently. It walked upright, with purpose. Adam's heart skipped a beat. This was the first time they had seen one of the undead with such deliberate movements. He motioned for the group to stay low as they crouched behind a cluster of trees. The figure moved closer, its eyes glowing with a strange, unsettling light. It was no longer the stumbling, aimless creature they had grown accustomed to. This one was something else, smarter, more aware. As it passed them by, Adam's breath caught in his throat. It didn't even glance in their direction, as if it knew they were there but didn't care. It was following a path, moving towards something, or someone, beyond the trees. Adam's instincts screamed at him to follow, but he resisted, knowing that rash decisions could cost them everything. Instead, he waited until the figure was out of sight before signaling for the group to move forward. "That's one of them," Luke whispered, his voice laced with both fear and fascination. "It's not just a mindless walker." Adam nodded. "We follow it. Stay close and quiet. It might lead us to the others." They moved through the woods like shadows, keeping their distance but never losing sight of the figure. The closer they got to its destination, the more anxious Adam became. What if they were walking into a trap? What if the leader they were searching for had already anticipated their every move? As they approached the edge of another clearing, the figure stopped and turned, its gaze falling on a large, dilapidated cabin hidden within the trees. The doors were ajar, and the air surrounding the structure felt unnaturally still. The undead figure slowly made its way toward the cabin, disappearing inside. Adam motioned for the group to halt. He took a deep breath, weighing the options. This was the moment of truth. They were so close now. If they were going to find the heart of the undead's command, it was here, inside that cabin. "Get ready," Adam whispered, his voice low and steady. "This is it." Myra's grip tightened around the makeshift rifle she had fashioned from scrap metal, and Luke drew an arrow from his quiver, his eyes focused and alert. They knew this was a dangerous gamble. If the undead had a leader, this cabin would be ground zero, and any attempt to infiltrate it could mean certain death. But Adam was determined. If the village was to survive, they had no other choice. They had to strike first, before the undead struck them. With one final glance at his companions, Adam took the first step toward the cabin, the air around them growing colder, the sense of dread thickening like a storm on the horizon. The cabin loomed before them, its weathered wood darkened by time and neglect. The once white paint had peeled away, revealing splintered, rotting beams beneath. The air felt dense with anticipation, the smell of decay mixing with the dampness of the surrounding forest. Adam stood at the edge of the clearing, his heart pounding in his chest. This was it, the heart of their journey, the place that could hold the key to their survival or their undoing. He motioned for the others to stay behind as he approached the cabin cautiously. His every instinct screamed for him to turn back, but he couldn't. Too much was at stake. He needed answers. The village needed answers. If they didn't uncover the truth now, they might never get another chance. Adam pushed open the creaky door, the sound echoing through the woods like a death knell. The interior was shrouded in darkness, the only light filtering through cracks in the boarded-up windows. The floorboards groaned underfoot as Adam stepped inside, his breath held tight in his chest. The air was heavy with the smell of rot, but there was something else too, something faint, but unmistakable. The faintest trace of fresh blood. "Be quiet," Adam whispered, his voice barely audible, as he gestured for the group to enter. Mira and Luke followed him, their eyes scanning every corner of the room, weapons at the ready. Every sense was heightened, the hairs on the back of their necks standing on end. The cabin was sparse, with only a few pieces of old, discarded furniture scattered around. But at the far end of the room, a large, broken mirror stood against the wall, its surface cracked and dirty. And in front of it, there was something, or rather, someone. A figure, standing motionless in the center of the room, facing the mirror. For a moment, Adam thought it was another undead, but there was something profoundly wrong with it. It was taller than any of the others, its skin stretched tight over its bones, giving it a gaunt, almost skeletal appearance. Its eyes glowed faintly, a sickly yellow hue that pierced the dimness. But it wasn't moving. It was as if it were waiting, watching, aware of their presence without ever acknowledging them. Adam's heart raced. This was it, the leader. The creature that had been guiding the undead, organizing them, making them stronger. He could feel its presence in the room like a weight pressing down on him. The air felt thicker here, heavier, as though the very atmosphere was suffocating them. "Don't let it see us," Adam whispered urgently, his voice tight with tension. "Stay hidden." Mira and Luke crouched low behind a nearby overturned table, their breath shallow as they waited for the right moment. The figure in the room continued to stand motionless, staring into the broken mirror as if in deep contemplation. Adam's mind raced. What was this creature? It didn't behave like the others. It wasn't mindless or driven solely by hunger. There was something more to it. He had heard rumors of leaders among the undead, creatures who retained some semblance of intelligence, perhaps even a shadow of their former selves. This one was different. It wasn't just leading the undead, it was orchestrating their every move. Suddenly, the figure in the mirror moved. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, it reached up and touched the surface of the glass. Its fingers traced the cracks, as though examining the reflection with a strange, almost hypnotic intensity. Adam felt a chill run down his spine. The creature was aware of the mirror in a way that no ordinary undead would be. Was it looking for something? Or was it waiting for something to happen? The room fell silent, save for the distant groaning of the undead outside. Adam's eyes flicked toward the door, his mind working overtime. The figure wasn't just a leader, it was more than that. It was tied to this place. But how? What did the mirror have to do with it? Before he could process the thought, the figure suddenly turned. It moved with a speed that was unnatural, its eyes locking onto Adam's group as if it had sensed their presence all along. Time seemed to freeze. Adam's heart pounded in his chest. This was the moment. The figure's lips parted, and for the first time, Adam heard it speak, a low, guttural voice that seemed to echo in his mind. "You should not have come." The words sent a shockwave through Adam's body. There was intelligence in that voice, more than the simple hunger and rage of the undead. This was something else entirely. Something far more dangerous. The room's temperature dropped, and the walls seemed to close in around them. Adam knew they couldn't stay hidden any longer. If they were going to survive this, they had to act, and fast. Now! Adam barked, and before the creature could react, he sprang into action. Luke fired a bolt from his crossbow, the projectile hitting the figure square in the chest. The creature staggered back, its gaze still locked on Adam, but there was no hint of pain in its expression, only a deep, unsettling curiosity. The battle for Veilbrook had begun. The moment Luke's crossbow bolt pierced the air and struck the figure, the tension in the room shattered like glass. The leader, or whatever it was, didn't react in the way Adam had expected. There was no sign of pain, no scream or fall. Instead, it simply staggered back, as if the bolt had barely disturbed it. Adam's blood ran cold as the creature's eyes, glowing a sickly yellow, locked onto him. It tilted its head slightly, as if assessing the threat with unnerving calm. The silence in the room was suffocating, the air thick with an unseen force pressing down on them. "Why do you resist?" The voice echoed in Adam's mind once more, cold and resonant, sending a shiver through his spine. Without warning, the figure lifted one arm, its fingers curling like talons. A deep growl rumbled from its chest as the ground beneath them trembled slightly. Adam didn't have time to process what was happening before the walls of the cabin seemed to warp, the shadows stretching unnaturally long, pulling toward the leader. Mira gasped, her voice quivering with fear. "What's happening?" The temperature dropped even further, and Adam could see his breath in the freezing air. He glanced around, feeling the weight of the situation closing in on them. The undead leader was not just an enemy, it was a force. A force that seemed to manipulate the very environment around them. "We need to move, now!" Adam shouted, his instincts kicking in. He grabbed Myra's arm and pulled her toward the exit, but before they could make it to the door, the shadows shifted, and something new emerged. From the dark corners of the cabin, more figures began to appear. They were not like the shambling undead Adam and his group had fought before. These were different, faster, stronger, and with a vicious intelligence behind their eyes. They were the leader's lieutenants, and they were here to protect their master. "Stay close," Adam ordered, spinning to face the oncoming threat. Luke fired again, his crossbow bolt slamming into one of the lieutenants, but it merely glanced off the creature's skin. The lieutenant snarled and lunged forward with a speed that caught Luke off guard. He barely managed to duck in time, the undead creature's claws scraping across his shoulder. The wound was shallow, but it was enough to make Luke wince in pain. Adam drew his makeshift machete, its blade reflecting the dim light, and charged toward the nearest lieutenant. He swung the blade with all his strength, but the creature blocked it with its arm, its unnatural strength forcing Adam to retreat. The undead didn't feel fear. It didn't feel pain. It only wanted one thing: to kill. Mira pulled out her rifle, aiming it at another of the lieutenants, but she hesitated. She knew that if they didn't take out the leader, they would be fighting an endless tide of these creatures. With shaking hands, she steadied her aim and fired, the shot echoing through the cabin. The bullet hit its mark, but the lieutenant barely flinched, instead charging at Mira with terrifying speed. In a split second, she dove to the side, barely avoiding its grasp. The sound of its claws scraping across the floor sent a wave of panic through her. She couldn't keep running. She couldn't keep hiding. "Get to the door!" Adam shouted, his voice cutting through the chaos. He fought fiercely against the lieutenants, but they were overwhelming him. He knew they couldn't win if they stayed in the cabin. The air was growing suffocating, and the odds were against them. The leader, its eyes never leaving Adam, raised one hand, and the shadows around the room seemed to come alive. The walls trembled, the ground cracked beneath their feet. Adam stumbled, caught off guard by the force, but he quickly regained his footing. He could feel the weight of the creature's power pressing on him, as though it was controlling everything in the room, manipulating the very world around them. "Don't let it control you," Adam yelled to his group. "We have to fight back with everything we have." He made his way toward the door, fighting through the haze of fear that clouded his mind. They couldn't afford to lose now. Not when they were so close. The lieutenants blocked their escape, but Adam wasn't about to back down. He swung his machete in a wide arc, cutting down one of the attackers, and forced his way toward the door. Mira, eyes wide with fear, followed him, her rifle still clutched in her hands. Luke was close behind, his crossbow at the ready. As Adam reached the door, the leader's voice boomed in his mind, reverberating like a sound wave. "You cannot escape. You will all become part of me." With a final push, Adam threw open the door and dashed into the forest, the cold air biting at his skin. His group followed him, but the leader's words lingered in his mind. They had barely made it out of the cabin alive, but Adam knew this wasn't over. The undead leader was still out there, and now, they had something far more dangerous to contend with: the lieutenants, creatures that seemed to be more than just mindless servants. The battle had only just begun, and the stakes were higher than ever. The cold air of the forest bit at Adam's skin as he and his group sprinted through the dense trees, the sounds of the undead creatures echoing behind them like a chorus of death. The distant groans and growls of the lieutenants reverberated through the woods, and Adam could feel the ground shaking beneath their feet. They were being hunted, and the leader's influence seemed to reach out even here, as if the very forest itself was being bent to its will. Adam didn't dare look back. Every instinct told him to keep running, to push forward through the thicket and toward the village, where there might still be a chance for safety. But the darkness of the forest, with its twisted branches and thick underbrush, made it feel as though the trees themselves were closing in on them. Behind them, the distant screeches and hisses of the lieutenants grew louder. The creatures were gaining on them, their speed unmatched by anything Adam had ever seen. These were no ordinary undead. They were predators, guided by intelligence and a ruthless desire to hunt. And now, it seemed, they were after him and his group, determined to finish what the leader had started. "Keep moving!" Adam shouted, his breath ragged from the exertion. "Don't stop! We can't let them catch us." Mira, her face pale and panicked, nodded and kept running beside him, her rifle clutched tightly in her hands. Luke followed closely behind, though he was struggling to keep up. The bolt wound from earlier was slowing him down, and Adam could see the pained expression on his face. They couldn't afford to slow down now. If they stopped, they would never get the chance to move again. Ahead of them, the forest path twisted, leading toward a small ridge that overlooked a deep ravine. The group had to make it there. If they could get across the ravine, they might be able to shake off their pursuers, or at least put some distance between them. But the undead were relentless, and Adam knew they wouldn't be safe until they were well out of the leader's reach. "We're almost there." Adam yelled over his shoulder. "Just a little further." But before they could make it to the ridge, something crashed through the trees ahead of them, blocking their path. Adam skidded to a halt, nearly colliding with Mira as he took in the sight before him. Standing at the edge of the ridge, silhouetted against the eerie moonlight, was one of the lieutenants. The creature's glowing yellow eyes pierced the darkness, locking onto Adam's group with unyielding focus. Its mouth hung open, revealing rows of sharp teeth, and its skin stretched tight over its bones, making it appear even more monstrous than it had inside the cabin. Adam's heart raced. There was no time to think. The creature was too close now, and the ravine lay just behind it, a gaping chasm that would swallow them whole if they tried to cross it. They were trapped. "We're not getting out of here, are we?" Myra's voice was barely a whisper, her gaze fixed on the creature ahead. The fear in her eyes was palpable. Adam gritted his teeth. "We fight. We can't give up now. Not when the village depends on us." Luke, despite his injury, stepped forward, steadying himself with his crossbow. "I'll cover you," he said, his voice strained but resolute. "You get across the ravine. I'll hold it off." "No," Adam said sharply, shaking his head. "We fight together. We survive together." Before they could come up with another plan, the lieutenant lunged forward with terrifying speed. It moved like a blur, its claws extending toward Adam. He barely had time to react before he was forced to duck under its swipe, the sharp talons scraping across his jacket. The creature was relentless, its movements fluid and quick, as though it was made to hunt. Mira fired her rifle, the shot hitting the lieutenant in the side, but it barely fazed the creature. The undead did not feel pain, not like humans. It didn't slow down. Instead, it snarled and turned, focusing its attention on Mira now. Luke's crossbow fired again, the bolt striking the creature in the chest, but it only seemed to anger it further. The lieutenant hissed, its yellow eyes narrowing as it focused on Luke. With a sudden burst of speed, it lunged at him, knocking him to the ground. Luke gasped, the breath knocked out of him as the creature's claws scraped across his chest. "No!" Mira screamed, rushing toward Luke, but the lieutenant was too fast, its claws digging into his side before she could get close enough to help. Adam acted without thinking. He threw himself at the lieutenant, slashing wildly with his machete. The blade cut deep into the creature's side, but it didn't stop. It hissed in pain, but the wound didn't seem to slow it down much. The creature's eyes locked onto Adam's, filled with an unholy intelligence that sent a wave of terror through him. It wasn't just hunting them, it was playing with them. With one last desperate swing, Adam managed to drive the machete deep into the creature's throat, the blade sinking in with a sickening crunch. The lieutenant stumbled back, its movements slowing as it gurgled and writhed in agony. Finally, with one last hiss, it fell to the ground, lifeless. But it wasn't over. Adam could hear more footsteps approaching, more undead lieutenants closing in on their position. The forest was alive with their presence. "We need to move now," Adam barked, grabbing Luke by the arm and hauling him to his feet. Luke winced in pain but nodded, determined not to slow them down. With the lieutenant down, they had a brief moment to breathe, but Adam knew they couldn't afford to waste it. They were still surrounded, and the leader's influence was growing stronger by the second. As they stumbled toward the ravine, Adam's mind raced. The chase wasn't over. The worst was yet to come. They had to make it to the village, but would they ever truly be safe again? The sound of rushing water filled the air as Adam and his group neared the edge of the ravine. It was a sharp drop, the jagged rocks below threatening to crush anyone who dared to fall. The forest had thickened, the trees closing in around them, blocking out most of the moonlight. It felt like they had entered a different world entirely, one where every shadow seemed to whisper death. Mira and Luke had barely caught their breath before they were moving again, driven by the need to escape the ever-growing threat. But as they reached the edge of the ravine, the weight of their situation began to settle in. There was no bridge, no way to cross without risking death. The ravine was too wide to jump, and the water below was deep and swift. "We can't get across," Mira said, her voice shaking. "We're stuck." Adam looked at the others, his heart racing as he tried to think of a way out. They had no choice but to face whatever was hunting them. The leader's influence was too strong, and if they didn't act now, they would be surrounded. The howling wind seemed to carry the sounds of the undead lieutenants, now much closer. The trees shook as if they could feel the tension in the air. They were coming. "We have to find a way to cross," Adam said, his voice steady despite the fear gnawing at him. "We can't let them trap us here." Luke's face was pale, the pain from his injuries still slowing him down. He glanced at the ravine, then at Adam. "How do you plan to get across?" "I don't know," Adam admitted, frustration bubbling in his chest. "But we don't have a choice. If we stay here, we die." The group stood at the edge, staring into the abyss. For a moment, it seemed like the world had stopped, as if the ravine itself was a barrier separating them from life and death. The only way forward was through it, and the only way out was to fight their way through. Suddenly, Adam spotted something out of the corner of his eye. A narrow ledge ran along the side of the ravine, barely wide enough to walk on, but it seemed to offer a chance, just a slim one. "We can climb down there," Adam said, pointing to the ledge. "It's our only shot." Mira hesitated. "It looks dangerous." "It is," Adam said, his voice low but firm. "But we have no choice. Either we face the ravine or we face those things." Luke grimaced, glancing at his injured side. "And you want me to climb down there?" "You don't have to," Adam said quickly, seeing the concern in Luke's eyes. "You stay back, cover us." "No," Luke said, gritting his teeth. "I'm with you. I'm not sitting this one out." Without another word, Adam led the way to the edge of the ravine, carefully lowering himself onto the narrow ledge. The rock was cold beneath his hands, and every movement felt like it could send him tumbling into the depths below. He couldn't afford to make a mistake. Mira followed next, her breathing quick but controlled. She kept her rifle slung across her back, every muscle tensed as she moved cautiously along the edge. Luke, despite his injury, was right behind her, his crossbow secured tightly to his chest. He was struggling to keep pace, but he was determined to press on. The group moved slowly, each step deliberate and cautious. The narrow path offered little room for error. One wrong move, and they would fall. Behind them, the noise of the undead lieutenants grew louder. The growls and screeches cut through the air like knives, sending waves of panic through Adam. The creatures were closing in, and it wouldn't be long before they reached the ravine. "We have to hurry," Adam muttered, his voice tense. His eyes flickered nervously over his shoulder, scanning the trees, waiting for any sign of movement. Just as Adam reached a slightly wider section of the ledge, he heard a sound that sent a chill through his spine. A distant rumble. It wasn't just the undead, it was something far worse. The ground beneath their feet trembled, and the trees above began to shake violently. "What is that?" Mira asked, her voice barely audible over the growing noise. Before Adam could answer, a massive creature, larger than the lieutenants they had faced earlier, burst through the trees. Its body was a twisted blend of flesh and shadow, its limbs long and sinewy, like something out of a nightmare. It had no face, just a gaping, black void where its head should have been. Adam froze, his heart skipping a beat. The leader. It had followed them, and it wasn't alone. The figure reached the edge of the ravine, its empty void of a face turning toward them. The air seemed to shift, the world around them growing colder, darker. "I told you," the voice echoed in Adam's mind, "there is no escape. You will become mine." The group stood frozen, caught between the darkness of the ravine and the nightmare before them. They were trapped. There was no way forward, no way back. The only thing left to do was face the leader and its terrifying presence head-on. Adam gripped his machete tightly, his knuckles white. He had no idea how they could survive this, but one thing was clear, he wasn't going down without a fight. "Get ready!" Adam shouted, his voice rising over the roaring wind. "We have one chance." The leader's voice rang in his ears, cold and mocking. "One chance? You've already lost." But Adam wasn't finished. Not yet. The leader's presence felt like an impenetrable wall of dread that pressed in on Adam and his group. Its chilling, faceless form loomed above them, casting an unnatural darkness over the ravine. Adam's breath caught in his throat, his pulse racing as the wind howled through the trees, carrying with it the ominous whispers of the undead that surrounded them. The leader's voice echoed through Adam's mind, cold and mocking. "Do you truly think you can fight me? You are nothing. Weak. Powerless." Adam's eyes flickered nervously to the others, Mira, Luke, and the injured group, each of them standing in a near-perfect line at the edge of the ravine. The narrow ledge beneath them had become a fragile thread of hope in a world of madness. The fact that they were still alive felt like a miracle, but Adam knew that this was it. The leader had caught up with them. It had led them here, cornered them in the one place where escape was impossible. But Adam refused to surrender. They had fought too hard, lost too much, to let the world end in the shadow of this creature. "We're not giving up," Adam growled, gripping his machete tighter. His voice was steady despite the terror that clawed at his insides. "We fight now, or we die trying." Mira steadied her rifle in her hands, her resolve hardening as she took a deep breath. Luke, despite his injuries, looked up at the creature and then back at Adam. The determination in his eyes mirrored Adam's. "We fight," Luke echoed, his voice raw but resolute. For a moment, it felt as if the entire world was holding its breath. The air crackled with tension, the sound of the wind and the distant groans of the undead filling the space around them. The leader stood motionless, its dark, hollow face never wavering. Its form rippled with an eerie, otherworldly energy that seemed to warp the air around it. Then, without warning, the leader lunged. Its motion was swift, its body moving faster than any human could react. It swept through the air like a shadow, its limbs stretching impossibly long as it descended upon them with terrifying speed. Adam acted instinctively, rushing forward to intercept the creature. His machete flashed through the air, but the leader twisted its form, evading the blow with ease. It wasn't just a mindless undead, it was a force, a manifestation of destruction, and it was far beyond anything Adam had faced before. Mira fired, her shot hitting the leader square in the chest. But once again, it barely flinched. The bullets seemed to lose their power as they hit the creature, dissipating against its dark form like water against stone. "It's no use," Mira shouted, panic rising in her voice. "It's invincible. We have to find a way to stop it." Adam grunted, his eyes darting around in search of anything that could help. His mind raced, the pressure of the situation pushing him to the edge. They couldn't defeat it with weapons alone. They needed something more, something the leader didn't expect. Luke, still clutching his crossbow, staggered forward, leaning against the edge of the ravine to steady himself. He pointed his weapon toward the leader, but there was doubt in his eyes. "There's no way we can kill it. We're too weak." Adam's eyes narrowed. A sudden thought struck him, a flash of an idea, something they hadn't tried before. A desperate plan. "Mira," Adam said, his voice low but urgent. "The ravine. The water. We can use it." Mira blinked, confusion flashing across her face. "The water? Are you crazy? If we fall?" "No. We don't fall," Adam interrupted. "We use the water to trap it. It's our only chance." Before Mira could respond, Adam turned toward Luke, grabbing his arm and pulling him into position. "Listen to me. We're going to lure it to the edge of the ravine. When it gets close enough, we push it over. The water will drag it down." Luke's eyes widened in realization. "You think that'll work?" "We don't have a choice," Adam said, turning back toward the leader. He had no idea if this would actually work, but it was their only hope. The ravine's current was strong enough to pull anyone into its depths, even the undead. If they could get the leader close enough, the water could sweep it away, at least for a while. Adam steadied himself, trying to keep his breath even. "Mira, when I give the signal, shoot at it. Draw its attention." Mira nodded, gripping her rifle tightly as she positioned herself behind Adam. Luke, though wounded, steadied his crossbow, ready to fire when the time came. They were about to take a desperate leap of faith. With a sudden, primal scream, Adam charged forward, closing the gap between him and the leader. The creature's dark void of a face turned toward him, its eyes gleaming with malevolent hunger. It lunged again, but Adam sidestepped just in time, leading it closer to the ravine. "Now!" Adam shouted. Mira fired, her shot ringing out and hitting the creature in its side. The leader shrieked, its form twisting and distorting as it turned its attention fully toward Mira. It began to move toward her, its form flickering like a dark flame. Adam and Luke rushed forward in unison, using the leader's distraction to get it to the very edge of the ravine. The leader was almost too close now, its jagged limbs reached out for them as it let out a low growl. Without a moment to spare, Adam grabbed Luke and pushed him away, jumping backward just as the leader surged forward. The weight of the creature crashed against the edge of the ravine. "Now, Luke!" Adam shouted. With a final, desperate thrust, Luke fired his crossbow straight into the leader's chest. The bolt hit with an echoing thud, but it wasn't the weapon that was important. It was the momentum. The leader was already too close to the edge. With a final screech of fury, the creature tipped forward, its form tumbling into the ravine. For a brief, suspended moment, the world seemed to pause. Then, the leader was gone, swept away by the unforgiving waters below. The group stood in stunned silence, the roar of the river below the only sound as the weight of what they had just done began to sink in. They had done it. They had survived. But Adam knew this was far from over. The leader might be gone, but the world they knew was still a wasteland, and the fight for survival was only just beginning. The eerie stillness that followed the leader's fall into the ravine felt like a cruel trick of fate. The winds, once howling through the trees, now seemed almost too quiet, as if the entire world was holding its breath. Adam, Mira, and Luke stood at the edge of the ravine, staring down at the swirling waters below where the leader had disappeared. The air felt thick with uncertainty. Had they truly defeated it, or was it only a temporary reprieve? Adam's heart raced as he fought to steady his breath. They had won this battle, but they all knew the fight was far from over. The undead horde was still out there, and the village, their last refuge, was no longer safe. Their only option now was to regroup, find a new strategy, and keep moving forward. But even with the leader gone, a heavy weight pressed down on him. What next? "We did it," Luke said quietly, his voice hoarse. But how long until more of them come? Adam didn't have an answer. The undead had been relentless in their pursuit, and although the leader was now gone, Adam knew there were more like it, more creatures lurking, waiting for the right moment to strike. "We need to keep moving," Adam said, his voice firm, though his heart felt heavy. "We can't stay here." Mira nodded silently, her rifle still clutched in her hands. Her gaze swept over the group, her eyes tired but resolute. "There's a shelter up ahead, another few miles east. We can make it there. It's safer than here." Adam turned to look at Luke, who had a grim expression on his face. His injury was still taking a toll, but he seemed to be holding up better than Adam had expected. The thought of pushing forward weighed heavily on Adam's mind, but they couldn't afford to stop. "Not yet." "You're sure it's safe?" Adam asked, though he knew they didn't have many choices left. If they stayed in this area, they would be vulnerable to the hordes still closing in on them. "It's the best we've got," Mira replied, her voice steady despite the exhaustion written across her face. "We'll make it. Just stay focused." With no other option, Adam nodded. "All right. Let's go." The group turned and began their trek eastward, moving as swiftly and silently as they could. The forest around them, once a source of comfort and familiarity, now felt alien, its trees looming over them like silent sentinels, hiding threats just beyond their sight. Every creaking branch or rustling leaf sent their hearts racing. The fear that had gripped them earlier had not subsided. It was now a constant companion, a gnawing reminder that survival was not guaranteed. As they walked, Adam's thoughts drifted back to the village. It had been their home for so long, their sanctuary amidst the chaos. He had promised the people there that he would keep them safe, but now, he realized, the fight for survival was no longer just about one place. The world had changed, and survival meant moving, adapting, and always staying one step ahead. The enemy wasn't just the undead. It was the desperation, the fear, and the loss that threatened to swallow them whole. Hours passed, and the forest began to thin out, giving way to a more open landscape. The path ahead was clearer, but that didn't mean it was any safer. Adam scanned the horizon, his instincts on high alert. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the shelter came into view. It was a small, isolated cabin, tucked away among a cluster of overgrown trees. The building was dilapidated, but it still stood strong, a symbol of resilience in a world that had forgotten what stability looked like. "We made it," Luke said, a faint trace of relief in his voice. For the first time in days, Adam allowed himself to relax just slightly. But as they approached the cabin, something felt off. The door to the shelter was slightly ajar, and Adam's gut twisted. He motioned for the others to stop. "This doesn't feel right," Adam said quietly. Mira raised an eyebrow. "What do you mean?" "Stay alert," Adam replied. "Something's wrong." He stepped forward cautiously, pushing the door open just enough to peer inside. The cabin was dark, but Adam could see signs of recent activity, footprints in the dirt, and the faint scent of smoke lingering in the air. This was someone's hideout, Adam muttered under his breath. "We're not alone." A sharp noise from inside the cabin caught their attention, a door creaking open, followed by the unmistakable sound of footsteps. Adam instinctively reached for his machete, his body tensing as the hairs on the back of his neck stood up. A figure emerged from the shadows, stepping into the faint light of the doorway. It was a man, disheveled but alive, his eyes wide with fear. "Who are you?" Adam demanded, his voice low and cautious. The man's eyes flicked from Adam to the group behind him, his breath ragged. "Please, you don't understand, they're coming. The undead, they're not just wandering. They're hunting." Mira stepped forward. "What are you talking about?" The man's face twisted in fear. "The horde, it's not random anymore. They're organized. The leader was just the beginning. They're coming for all of you, coming for anyone who's still alive." Adam felt the weight of the man's words settle deep into his chest. The leader was gone, but the war was far from over. The undead had evolved, had adapted, and now they were smarter, more relentless than ever. The group had only just begun to understand the true scale of the horror they were facing. "Where can we go?" Luke asked, his voice urgent. "We need to get out of here." The man's gaze flickered toward the woods beyond. "There's a safe haven. But it's far, and it's not guaranteed. The undead are everywhere now. They won't stop." Adam's heart sank, but he didn't hesitate. "We don't have a choice. We go." As they prepared to leave, Adam knew the truth: this fight was far from over, and the road ahead would be even darker than the one behind them. But for now, there was hope. The will to survive still burned inside them. And as long as that flicker of hope remained, they would keep fighting. The group moved forward, knowing that this was only the beginning of the next chapter. But this time, they were not just surviving, they were fighting for a future. And as long as they had each other, they stood a chance. In this final part, the story reaches its emotional climax. The group has fought and survived against the overwhelming threat of the leader, but the true scope of the danger becomes apparent. The undead are evolving, and the group faces a new, even more terrifying challenge. The story ends on a note of both survival and uncertainty, leaving room for future battles while also emphasizing the strength of the group's resolve.